Welcome. Before we begin, take a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Are you lying in bed, the lights dim, a soft blanket pulled up to your chest? Or maybe you're sitting quietly, a warm drink in your hands, letting the day slowly fade. Look around you, or just imagine. What time is it where you are? Is it deep into the night, or the quiet golden edge of evening? Wherever you are, and whenever you're hearing this, I'm glad you're here. Tonight I'll take you back, far back, to a world of stone walls, flickering torches, and echoing halls. Not a tale of kings or queens, but the story of someone forgotten, a young boy, sold for 6 copper coins, sent to live and work and grow old in the cold belly of a medieval castle. So now, close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and come with me. Beneath the stone, where the fires burn low, the nights are long, and one life quietly unfolds. The sky was heavy with clouds when he arrived, grey, flat, and pressing down like the lid of a pot. It was the kind of cold that didn't sting. It just settled, slowly, into the skin, into the bones. The wind didn't blow, it whispered, and it curled through the gaps in your sleeves and the corners of your neck like a secret. He stood outside the gate of Castle Blackthorn, arms folded against himself, feet bare and pink from cold. He was small, not sickly, not strong, just small and still. Everything he had ever owned, 3 copper buttons, a bit of twine, and a scrap of blue cloth, had been taken from him back at the village. Now he carried nothing. The gate rose in front of him like a mountain of iron and wood, thick with rusted nails, lined with old scars. It didn't just keep things out, it kept things in. No flags, no music, just the groan of old wood in the wind and silence. His mother stood behind him, or maybe beside him. Later, he wouldn't be sure, only that her hand had rested on his shoulder for a moment, warm, trembling, and her voice, so soft he barely heard it, said, "Be useful, be invisible." Then the coins were counted, 6 of them. 6 copper discs, dull and slightly bent. That was all he was worth. The steward barely looked at him, just glanced once, like someone checking a sack of flour, and the gate opened. Not with a creak, but a slow, wet peeling sound, like something old being torn open after years. He stepped forward, and the light behind him was gone. No one asked his name. Inside the gate, the world changed. The air was colder, still. Sound didn't travel, it folded inward. Even his own footsteps seemed to stop a few feet away. The courtyard was uneven stone, worn by rain. A cart leaned on broken wheels, chickens scratched at nothing. And around the edges, shadowy figures moved, heads low, wrapped in shawls and rags. A girl, not much older than him, struggled with a bucket half her size. A man scrubbed a stone wall, red hands working in slow circles. No one looked up. No one spoke. Then a voice, dry, steady and deep, said, "You'll do." He turned. She was tall, or maybe it just seemed that way, wrapped in grey wool, apron stained dark with something that had dried and stayed. Her eyes were thin and sharp, her face like tree bark. This was Mistress Orla. She didn't ask where he was from. She didn't ask what he could do. Just turned and said, "Come now." And he followed. They passed 3 doors, each one heavier than the last, then down a corridor of stone, low ceiling, walls damp with age. The air smelled of smoke, iron, and something older. Footsteps echoed faintly from far above. And then a bell. 5 low, slow chimes. Mistress Orla didn't pause. She said, "That's the morning bell. You'll wake before it, always." He nodded. Quietly, they reached a small wooden door, more of a hatch, really. She opened it. Inside was darkness and straw, and a smell that wasn't quite bad, just tired, like something that had been forgotten a long time ago. There was a blanket in one corner, thin, torn. Another boy already lay curled up near the back. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Mistress Orla handed him a bundle of fabric. "Change," she said. "Your place is here." The bundle held a tunic, too large, a belt made of rope, 2 woolen socks that didn't match. He changed quickly, not because he was cold, though he was, But because he didn't want to be seen, he folded his old clothes and tucked them under the straw, not because he'd ever wear them again, but because they were still his. Mistress Orla returned with a broom. It was taller than he was. The bristles were tied together with fraying string. She placed it in his hands. "You'll sweep the hallway before the kitchens. Don't miss the corners. Don't stop unless I say." And then she left. The boy held the broom for a long time, not moving, not thinking, just holding. That night, his first night, he didn't sleep. The floor was hard. The straw poked through the blanket, and the other boy beside him snored softly, like a kettle that hadn't quite boiled. Outside the cupboard door, the castle made its own sounds. A heavy creak, footsteps overhead, the long, distant scrape of iron on stone. It felt less like a building, and more like something breathing. Alive. He lay on his side, eyes open in the dark. There was no candle, no warmth, only stone, and cold, and breath. He didn't cry, not that night, but he didn't sleep either. He simply waited. The morning did not arrive with light, it arrived with footsteps. Slow, hard ones, leather against stone. Then the groan of a door hinge, a breath of cold, and a voice, flat and brisk. Up. He opened his eyes, or tried to. They felt stuck, dry. The air in the straw closet was thick, not with warmth, but with the closeness of breath and dust. Beside him, the other boy had already sat up. No words, no stretch. Just motion. Familiar, automatic. The door opened wider. Mistress Orla stood there again, a small oil lamp in her hand, its flame licking the glass with orange glow. Follow. And they did. The hallway was colder than the closet, and darker. The stones beneath his feet felt wet, though he didn't see water. It was just always there, in the air, in the walls. They passed under low arches, past stacked firewood, long since dry, past doors nailed shut, past tapestries faded into patches of colour and thread. The castle was not asleep, but it was not awake either. It breathed slowly through the stone. The boy was handed a rag. It was stiff, smelled faintly of vinegar and something sour. The girl from the courtyard, the one with the too heavy bucket, was now carrying a wooden tray. On it, 3 stale crusts of bread, 1 pitcher of water, 5 cups. They sat in the corner of the scullery, cross-legged on the stone floor. He bit the bread. It scraped his tongue, but he ate, he drank. Slowly, every sip counted. No one spoke, not because they couldn't, but because it simply wasn't done. He learned the rhythm not from being told, but by watching. The eldest among them was a boy named Rook. He had pale hair and a scar across his thumb. He never looked hurried, never looked pleased. He worked like the stone worked, steadily, silently, without asking for thanks. Rook swept first, long strokes, slow turns. He showed the boy, once. No second time. "You do it like this," he whispered, "or they'll make you do it twice." That was the only sentence he would say that day. The broom was taller than him, but not heavier. It scratched along the flagstones like a dry whisper, back and forth, back and forth. He followed the lines Rook had made. The corners were the worst, full of hair and things without names, cobwebs like lace, droppings, dust older than memory. But he didn't stop, not even when his hands began to ache, because stopping meant being seen, and being seen meant something worse. He learned the doors by the way they opened. The wide ones led to rooms with light, the narrow ones to rooms with heat, and the ones with iron bolts. You didn't look at those. Some doors never opened at all, and some opened from the other side. Those were the ones you learned to listen for. That afternoon, he was taken to the laundry room. It wasn't a room, really, just a narrow space between the inner and outer walls. The light came from a slit above. Steam lived here, and the sound of dripping, and the smell of lye and wet cloth. The women didn't speak to him, but they nodded and handed him a tub. The water was still warm, but the cloth inside had cooled. He wrung it, again, again, and again, until his wrists ached and his knuckles turned red. Then the same cloth again, and again. Time stopped mattering. There was only work, and the breath between it. That night, when he lay down again in the straw closet, the other boy, whose name was still unknown, handed him a square of cloth. "Put this behind your neck," he muttered. "Helps with the cold." He took it, held it to his cheek for a moment, then tucked it behind his neck, just like he'd been told. The straw still poked, the stone still breathed its chill. But he slept. Not long, not well, but enough. In the days that followed, he learned more. That you walked quietly, that you carried things with both hands, that if you dropped something, you did not run. You picked it up, slowly, and placed it back. That if a noble passed, you turned your face to the wall, and if they spoke to you, you waited to see if they wanted an answer. He learned the sound of different bells, the one for morning, the one for washing, the one for chapel, and the one that meant someone had died. The castle was old, but not dead. It moved in circles, like breath, like the moon, and now he was part of it. Not seen, not known, but there, a boy, with a broom and a straw bed, hidden beneath the stone. The castle had its own kind of clock, not one with hands or numbers, but made of sound. The slow clang of the chapel bell, the shuffle of feet before dawn, the hiss of the kitchen fires catching, the clatter of the laundry tubs being dragged across stone. Even when he slept, he began to know the time by the weight of footsteps above his straw bed. There were the soft-footed ones, servants like him, passing quietly. Then the firm, faster ones, guards or stewards. And then the echoes that didn't belong to either. These moved slowly, never rushed, as if they had no reason to hurry. Those were the noblemen. And if you heard those steps, you stopped moving. You turned to the wall, and you waited. His world was made of halls, long, narrow, breathing halls, stretching like veins through the stone. Some were warm, lined with tapestries that muffled sound. Others were bare, wind slipping through the cracks, carrying with it the smell of old fire and something less easy to name. His tasks changed daily, but always began the same. A rag, a broom, a bucket. Sometimes he was sent to light candles, sometimes to scrape soot from the base of the chimneys. But his hands never stayed clean for long. He liked the quiet jobs best, those that didn't require speaking. The echo was a kind of company, his own footsteps, the brush against stone, the trickle of water. Sometimes, if no one was nearby, he would hum to himself, just a note or two. Low, barely sound, and in the stillness it would come back to him. The hallway would hum with him, as if the castle, for a breath, remembered it had a voice. There was one hallway he feared. Not because it was dark, though it was. Not because it was cold, though it stayed colder than most. But because of the door. It was heavy, iron-bound, always locked, and no one ever spoke of it. Servants would walk faster near it. Some made a sign with their fingers when they passed. Even Rook, who spoke little and feared less, avoided it without being asked. One day, as they carried buckets of ash past it, the boy asked quietly, "What's in there?" Rook didn't stop walking, didn't even glance sideways. He just whispered, "Not for us." And that was the end of it. He grew used to the cold. He grew used to the ache in his legs. But there were other things he still hadn't learned, like how to keep his hands from shaking when the steward barked his name, or how to carry 2 pails of water up the spiral stair without spilling, or how not to flinch when the cook shouted, even if the shout wasn't for him. He watched the older ones, not for kindness, there wasn't much, but for how they moved, how they avoided trouble, how they stayed unnoticed. There was a kind of survival in silence. One evening, as the wind howled outside the walls and the oil lamps guttered low, he was told to clean a part of the keep he had never seen before. The upper passage near the guest rooms. He had heard of them. Rooms that had carpets, glass windows, even basins of warm water. He didn't expect to see anyone there, but as he reached the top step, bucket in hand, he froze. A girl stood there, not in rags, not in linen, but in a blue dress, with sleeves that touched the floor and hair combed like silk. She looked at him, not through him, at him, and smiled, a real smile, not pity, not mockery, just gentle. He lowered his eyes immediately. She passed him, and the echo of her steps stayed with him long after the hall was empty. That night, back in the straw closet, he said nothing. But he held the memory like a warm coal. A girl in blue, who looked and saw. The first time he was sent to the soap house, it was still dark. Not just early, but thick, moonless, breath-fogging dark. The kind that made everything feel farther away. Mistress Orla handed him a bundle, a cloth, a slate board, and a pair of cracked gloves. The gloves didn't fit. "You'll carry Ash today," she said. He nodded. He didn't ask why. You didn't ask why. He followed her past the main kitchens, where heat already pulsed from inside. The cooks were beginning their day, chopping, heating, muttering. But they didn't speak to him. He was smaller than their pots. They passed the courtyard, where frost had painted the stones in silver. And there, at the far edge, was the soap house. It was made of timber and stone, patched with moss, leaning slightly. A thin chimney coughed white smoke into the still morning air. Inside, the smell was sharp. Not bad, but thick, fat. Ash, lye, a mixture that curled in your nose and settled behind your eyes. A large woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows stirred a great black cauldron with a wooden paddle. Her hands were red, her eyes barely flicked toward him. She pointed with her chin to a pile of firewood and ash buckets. "Sorted." So he did. The work was not hard, just constant. He sifted ash, removed pieces of wood not fully burned, carried buckets from one side of the room to the other, brought water from the well, lifted, poured, stirred. Sometimes the woman would test the mix by dipping a stick into the pot and snapping it in her fingers. She seemed to know just by the smell when it was ready. He watched her, quiet as a shadow. Once she looked over and said, "Don't breathe in when you stir. It'll catch your throat." He nodded. He remembered. By mid-morning, his arms ached. His sleeves were damp. His gloves had torn. But he kept moving. There were no windows in the soap house, only one slit in the wall, letting in a blade of pale light. It shifted slowly as the hours passed. Time was measured by chores: fill the cauldron, scrub the boards, empty the lye trays, begin again. When the woman sat, he scrubbed the floor. When she left to speak with the steward, he cleaned the edge of the pot. It wasn't ordered, it wasn't kind, but it was simple. Later he was allowed a break. Not long, just enough to eat. Mistress Orla had left a crust of bread wrapped in cloth on a stone bench. He sat, ate slowly, listened to the wind brush against the walls. Then, from behind the soap house, a soft sound. Sobbing. He stood, stepped around the corner. There, tucked beside a pile of broken crates, was a girl. She was older than him, maybe 12. Her dress was torn near the hem, her hair half undone. She didn't look up. He didn't know what to do. So he didn't speak. Just sat, a short distance away, and placed his bread crust beside him. A minute passed. 2. Then she reached forward. Took it. Didn't say thank you. Didn't need to. They sat in silence, with the wind and the smoke and the sting of lye in their throats. That evening, when he returned to the closet, he smelled of soap and smoke and something bitter. The other boy sniffed once, wrinkled his nose, and turned away. He didn't mind. He lay down, tucked his hands under his knees, and remembered the warmth of the soap house fire, and the girl, and the quiet way she had reached for the bread. Bread was never just bread in the castle. It was counted, stacked, sliced in quiet, and always watched. There were loaves for the high tables, white, soft, round, made with sifted flour and butter, churned by hands the boy would never see. These loaves were wrapped in cloth and carried carefully. Then there were the others, the brown ones, harder, sometimes burnt. These were for the servants and the dogs. The boy learned quickly that bread mattered. Who made it, who carried it, who broke it. It told you who you were. The bakehouse stood near the outer wall, close to the grain sheds. In the winter mornings, it was one of the warmest places in the world. He was sent there on a frost-bitten dawn, hands trembling inside sleeves too thin. Mistress Orla gave him a sack of flour and a cloth to tie around his head. Cover your hair, no crumbs in the kneading. Inside, flour dust floated like snow in the morning light. The ovens glowed red. The baker, a wide man with flour on his eyebrows, grunted when he entered. That was the only greeting. He pointed to a mound of dough already rising. "Kneel there. Fold from the edges. Don't punch." So he did. The dough was warm. Software strangely alive. It breathed under his hands. The baker moved like someone who had been doing this since birth. Kneading, folding, tapping loaves, listening to cracks and sighs from inside the ovens. There was no talk, only the rhythm of work. The boy followed it. Fold, turn, pat, dust. He lost time that way. By midday, trays were stacked, some carried off by footmen to the great hall, others by girls with aprons and fast steps to the steward's pantry. One loaf was left behind on the bench, slightly burned. He looked at it. The baker saw him looking. "Take it if you want it. It's nothing." He did. It was still warm inside. The crust broke like bark under his fingers. The inside was soft, cloudy. He sat by the door, ate slowly, savoring it. It was perhaps the best thing he'd ever tasted. That afternoon, he was sent to carry bread to the lower tables in the servants' hall. He placed the loaves one by one, some sliced, some whole, onto the wooden board. The steward watched with a pinched face, counting under his breath. The hall smelled of stew, boiled roots, damp wool. He worked quietly. No one looked up. Only once, when he passed by the bench where the laundry girl sat, did he see a face he recognized. The girl from the soap house. She didn't smile, but she nodded. That was enough. That night, the closet felt colder. He huddled beneath the blanket and thought of warm bread. The way it had felt in his hands, the sound of its crust, the softness within. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in many nights, he dreamed of something good. Not escape, not home, just bread, warm, simple, and his. The bell tower stood alone, not far from the keep, but somehow apart, like a finger stretched from a clenched hand. It rose above everything, stone on stone, narrow and tall. Its windows were thin slits, its roof lost in mist. He had seen it many times from the courtyard, but never from within. Until now. Mistress Orla handed him a wool cloak, thicker than anything he'd worn before. It smelled faintly of old smoke and dried rosemary, likely borrowed from one of the older servants. She did not explain why. "You're climbing today," she said. "You'll help with the bells." He didn't ask what that meant. He never asked. Not anymore. Just pulled the cloak around his shoulders and followed her shadow out into the courtyard. The morning was still young, barely a breath past dawn. Clouds hung low, pale and swollen with snow. He could see his breath. The tower door was iron-bound. It groaned when opened, sending echoes fluttering upward like birds startled from a roost. Inside, cold air, winding stairs. A rope dangling down the center shaft, swaying gently though no wind reached inside. A man waited there. Bent slightly at the shoulder, beard thick with grey. His fingers, long and chapped, held a coil of rope like it was part of him. His name was Thomas, though no one called him that aloud, only the ringer. He nodded once, said nothing, then turned, and up they went. The stairs spiraled in silence. Each footfall sent a whisper upward. Stone worn smooth by hundreds of years of steps. There were no torches, only small holes in the wall where faint light trickled in, enough to see the next stair, but never the top. The higher they climbed, the colder it grew. The air thinned. The sounds of the castle, kitchens, voices, footsteps, faded to a hum far below. His legs began to ache, but he didn't complain. He had learned better. His breath came in little puffs, white in the gloom, then finally, light, a wooden hatch. Thomas pushed it open, and they stepped into the chamber. It was not what he expected. No windows, just great beams crisscrossing under the roof. The wood was dark with age, etched with carvings, initials, dates, crude birds and faces, and above them, the bells. 3 of them, hanging from massive yokes, cradled in shadow. They did not shine, they did not move, but they felt alive. The boy tilted his head back. Each bell had a name carved at its base. One read Laurentia, another Matthias, and the third, the largest, was simply the breath. Thomas placed a hand on the rope and looked at him. This one's the noonday bell. You'll learn to ring it soft but steady, not like the fire bell. That one you pull with your whole weight. Fast, fierce, no pausing. The boy nodded. His hands itched to touch the ropes but stayed still. Then Thomas pulled. The first time he heard it from up close, it startled something deep in his chest. A low, bone-deep hum, then the heavy strike, then the ring, long, round, and endless. It didn't just echo through the room, it echoed through him. He covered his ears, but still felt it in his ribs. Thomas only laughed. "You feel it before you hear it," he said. "That's how you know it's real." The rest of the morning was a lesson. He learned the ropes, how they were waxed with tallow, how they frayed and had to be rewrapped. He was shown the levers, the counterweights, the pegs, how the bells turned slowly with age, how the birds sometimes tried to nest in the corners of the rafters. He swept, dusted, oiled the hinges. His hands turned black with soot, then grey with dust. They paused only once, when Thomas pointed out through a narrow slit in the tower wall. "See that ridge?" he said. Far in the distance, beyond the woods and river, a faint blue line rose against the sky. "The monks say that's the spine of the world. Beyond that, nothing but snow and God." The boy stared, and for a moment forgot the cold. At midday, Thomas shared a slice of dried apple and a strip of salted meat. They sat in silence on a wooden beam. The bells swayed slightly above them, moved by wind they could not feel. Below, the castle moved. Figures bustled in the yard, chickens scattered, horses were being walked. But none of it reached this high. Up here, everything was slower, quieter, older. In the afternoon, he practiced, pulling the smaller rope, once, twice, listening to the tone. Thomas corrected him gently. "Not too sharp. It's not a whip. It's a call." So he pulled again, this time smoother. The sound stretched, settled, and echoed, outward, downward, through stone and wood and bone. The wind howled sometimes. It shook the tower gently. The wooden beams creaked like an old ship. Thomas said that once, long ago, lightning struck the roof, split the stone, and yet the bells remained. He placed a hand on the thick rope beside them. "They've seen everything," he said. "Sieges, fire, plague, weddings, births, all of it." The boy nodded, didn't speak. Words felt too heavy for a place like this. That evening, the stairs down felt different. He was tired, yes, but lighter. His muscles ached, but inside something was warm. He had held a rope that touched a bell, and the bell had answered. Back in the straw closet, he lay still. The sounds of the day played back like distant music. Not the scraping of brooms, not the clatter of buckets, but the hum of the tower, the stretch of the rope, the breath of the bell. He smiled, just barely, and slipped into sleep, with ringing in his bones. Not loud, not harsh, just enough to remind him that today he had risen, and the world had heard. The first storm came with no warning, not rain, not wind, but voices, raised, rough, sharp as flint against flint. The boy had been carrying firewood into the steward's passage when it began, a long echoing shout that bounced down the corridor like thrown iron. He stopped in place, then the second voice came. Lower, measured, but firm, like a knife pressed instead of swung. He could not make out the words, only the shape of them. Then silence, the kind of silence that waits. That night, the castle shifted. Guards moved quicker. Doors that were always left ajar were closed. Candlelight seemed dimmer, as if even flames were told to hush. At supper, the servants whispered of travellers from the north, of bannermen, of messengers, of a letter carried in a leather tube, still wet from river crossing. He listened, eyes down, chewing a crust gone too hard. The wind outside moaned against the high windows. Some said it was just politics. Others said it was war. He didn't know the difference. In the following days, changes came. Extra food was sent to the armory rooms. Old armor was dragged from storage, brushed with oil, fitted to mannequins. Men trained in the yard again, not playfully, but with grit. Each clang of blade on blade rang sharper. He was sent to help in places he'd never been allowed before. The supply cellars, the hidden pantry behind the hall. Once, he even followed Mistress Orla into the map room. Long tables, rolled scrolls, ink pots, candle stubs, and 3 men in cloaks, speaking low. She handed over a sealed bundle, nodded, and left. He followed, but not before catching a single name spoken clearly. Meyerfield. That night it rained. Not the quiet kind, the lashing kind, the kind that comes sideways and fills the cracks in stone with its howl. The boy curled in his straw blanket, listening. Somewhere above, a shutter banged loose. Somewhere below, a dog barked twice, then fell silent. In dreams, he heard horses, not riding, fleeing. The next morning, the cook's fire would not light. The wind had turned and blown back down the flue, filling the kitchen with smoke. He helped Rook fan it out with cloths and coughing lungs. When it cleared, his face was streaked black. Mistress Orla passed by and paused. She wiped his cheek gently with the end of her sleeve. Storm finds every crack, boy. Best learn where yours are. Later, he was sent to the top of the curtain wall to help carry sandbags and patch weak stone with cold mortar. He had never been that high before. The wind tried to lift him. His fingers ached with the cold. But he kept moving. One of the guards offered him a wool scarf. He didn't speak, just tied it around the boy's neck with thick fingers and walked away. From the wall's edge, the land stretched far. Brown fields, wet roads, no riders, no fire. But something was coming. Even the birds flew differently. That night, sleep was thin. The boys in the straw closet tossed. One of them muttered names in his sleep. The boy lay still, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. Not every storm is made of water. Not every war needs swords. Sometimes the castle just waits, stone upon stone, listening, breathing, enduring. Laundry days began before the sun rose. Not in the scullery, not in the soap house, but far from the castle walls, to the place where the cold river bent like a silver ribbon through the woods. That's where the real cleaning happened, where lye met water and fire met cloth and calloused hands worked steam and snow into memory. The boy was woken by a tap on the foot. A soft one, not the harsh shake of kitchens. He sat up. Mistress Orla was already gone. In her place stood a girl, the same one from the soap house weeks before. She didn't speak, just held out a bundle of folded cloth, tunics, aprons, underskirts, shirts, and a second bundle, ash soap, a flat stick and a coil of rope. Then she turned. He followed. Outside, the world was blue with early dawn. The frost hadn't melted. It cracked beneath their steps. They crossed the lower field in silence, past the old orchard where apple trees clawed the sky, past the edge of the woods where the birds hadn't yet begun, down toward the river. The laundry stone was nothing more than a shelf of flat rock jutting into the current. It was smooth from centuries of scrubbing. The rope was strung between 2 old pines already hung with damp cloths. 2 other girls were there. One was humming, the other was crying, not loudly, but in that quiet, hiccuping way that made the boy look away. They didn't speak to him, just made space. The older girl handed him a tunic and pointed to the bucket. So he knelt, dipped the cloth, laid it across the stone, and began to beat it with the stick. Not hard, not wild, but steady. He learned quickly how to twist from the wrists, how to angle the stone so the water ran clear off the edge, how lye burned if left too long, how ash soap stung if rubbed into knuckles. He didn't complain. By mid-morning, the pile had shifted. Wet things to the left, wrung things to the right, a rhythm of motion, and steam rising from hands that never stopped moving. The girl said her name was Elsha. She didn't say much else, but once, when he tried to carry too many shirts and slipped in the mud, she laughed. Not meanly, just a short, surprised laugh. She helped him up, brushed dirt from his sleeve. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't. They went back to work. The water turned colder by afternoon. It bit at ankles and knees. They had no boots, just wrapped cloth and wool. His fingers turned red, then pale, then red again. They didn't stop, even when it began to snow. Not thick, just little white petals that danced across the river and caught in the folds of drying fabric. The cloth stiffened. The soap froze in its bowl. Still they worked. By the end of the day, his arms shook with effort. His back ached, his feet burned, but when the last tunic was hung, heavy with cold, he felt something strange. Pride. It wasn't much, but it was clean, and it was done. Elsha handed him a flat stone. It was smooth, round, warm from her pocket. "Keep it," she said. "It helps with the cold if you hold it at night." He nodded, took it. Didn't know how to say thank you without it sounding too large, so he said nothing. But that night in the straw closet, he held the stone in both hands, felt the memory of warmth and of water, and of Elsha's laugh rising like mist off the river. The castle was old, so old that even the stones had stories, not the kind you read or recite, but the kind that seep through the floor when you're quiet enough to listen. Stories told in the scent of mildew behind the hearthstone, in the way the tapestries swayed slightly when no window was open, in how the light hit certain stones, revealing carvings that had long been rubbed smooth. This was a castle that had been built, rebuilt, broken, and mended again, each ruler adding a wall, each century burying a corridor. It stood heavy and wide on the hill like a giant trying not to move, and beneath that weight secrets slept, some right in the open, others behind doors. He didn't find it on purpose. The day had started like any other, dull and grey. He had been assigned to help move salted fish barrels to the lower stores. The stairs to the undercellar were steep and damp, the kind where moss grew between stones, and each step felt uncertain. He and two older boys rolled the barrel too far. It bumped a wall, and something behind the stone responded. Not loudly, but with a subtle click. The other boys heard nothing. They kept talking, about a dogfight in the courtyard, about a footman caught kissing a steward's daughter. But he stood still. His hand touched the wall. He felt it. Cold, dry, too smooth. A seam ran between the stones, not a crack, but a line too straight for accident. He said nothing, just pressed gently. Nothing happened. But the next day, when he was sent again, alone this time, he brought a candle stub and a length of twine. He pressed again, and the stone shifted. It wasn't a door in the usual sense. No hinge, no knob, just a slab that gave way like it remembered being moved. It creaked inward just enough. Behind it, blackness. The air changed. He could feel it on his teeth, colder, older, heavier. He didn't hesitate. He stepped inside. The tunnel narrowed quickly. His shoulders brushed the walls. The air was filled with the scent of wet stone and something metallic. Drip, drip, drip. Water echoed ahead, not running, falling, slowly, rhythmically. He lit the candle. The flame fought the damp, but it held. The walls were smooth, carved intentionally. Not a natural cave, but made. He guessed the passage was older than the hallways above. He walked carefully, one hand skimming the left wall, the other holding the candle low to catch roots, cracks, or drops of old ceiling lime. The ground sloped slightly, downward, deeper. After maybe 20 steps, or maybe 50, he saw it. A wooden door, not large, not ornate, just set into the stone like a tooth. He reached for the latch. It was cold, greasy with age. The door opened inward with a groan, inside darkness. And then the shape of a room. It was no bigger than a closet. A cot made of rope and wood sat low to the ground. A metal basin, a chipped bowl. On the wall, a hook held a cloak long turned to dust. On the floor, a single candle, melted down into a lump. He stepped inside. The silence here was heavier than outside, but it didn't feel frightening, just forgotten. He sat on the cot. The ropes creaked. Dust rose and settled. He thought of questions. Who lived here? Why? But the room gave no answers. Still, it welcomed him. He stayed only a few minutes that first time. Just enough to light the candle again and trace a finger along the old basin. Just enough to breathe it in. The scent of quiet, of stone, of long-held secrets. Then he left, sealed the stone, and told no one. But he came back, again and again, some days only for a few minutes, to sit, to think, to rest in a place where no one expected his hands to be busy. Other times he brought scraps of things, a smooth pebble from the riverbed, a stub of charcoal from the bell tower fire, a bit of bread too hard to eat. He kept them in the bowl. He did not know why. It felt like building something, or maybe offering something, to whatever silence lived there. One afternoon, after a long morning spent scrubbing pans, he returned with a needle he had found on the stairs, bent and dull. He laid it on the windowsill. There was no window, but still he called it that. He sat for a long time, listening to the water drip, watching his breath form clouds in the air, thinking of nothing and everything. One day, the girl from the river, Elsha, saw him slipping away. She didn't follow. But that night in the straw closet, she whispered, "There are places that breathe." He said nothing, but he wondered. Had she found a place too? Was hers warm? Did it have walls? Or was it somewhere inside her? The secret room became his quiet, his hiding, a world not ruled by orders or punishments, a space without voices, footsteps, or eyes. No one called him boy there, no one called him anything. In that room, he didn't have to remember who he was, or what he had lost. He only had to be, and that was enough. Sometimes the castle shook with noise, horns, hooves, strangers in armor. But not there. The tunnel stayed still, the room held its breath, and he would sit in the quiet. With candlelight dancing, with the dust swirling, with nothing but stone and breath and a heartbeat that finally didn't have to run. One evening, he found a scrap of cloth behind the cot. Old, frayed, but once perhaps part of a banner. Red and gold thread. He folded it gently, placed it on the cot. Another offering, another mystery. He didn't try to solve the room. He just visited. That was enough. One day, years later, when his hair would darken, then thin, and his back would begin to bow, he would still remember that door, even if he never found it again. Even if someone bricked it up or forgot to whisper about its stones, he would still remember the weight of the quiet, the gift of the unseen, and the way it felt to be somewhere that asked nothing of him. The castle was not known for joy. Its walls were thick with duty, its halls filled with echo and instruction. There was always something to carry, something to clean, someone to answer. But once a year, just once, the rules bent. Festival Day. It arrived not on a fixed date, but when the steward and the stars agreed, when the harvest had been brought in, when the cellars were filled and the sheep folded in for winter, when the air smelled like firewood and the trees had dropped their gold. Then and only then a bell would ring, one not heard any other day, and the castle would begin to change. The boy first learned of it in whispers. At night in the straw closet, one of the older boys told a story of sweet buns the size of fists, of music that came from vials and pipes instead of brooms and scolding, of dancing, even for servants. He didn't believe it at first. But then the bell rang. Low, long, a sound that curved around the stone like ribbon. He had been carrying a sack of flour when he heard it. Everyone froze, even the mice, it seemed. Mistress Orla appeared in the kitchen doorway, and she smiled. The days before Festival Day were busier than any others. The servants cleaned not just to prepare, but to earn it. Windows were scrubbed from corner to crown. Banners were brushed free of dust and shaken in the courtyard breeze. The boy was sent with a brush to polish the hinges of the chapel door, not because anyone would look, but because they might. Everyone moved faster, but lighter. There was humming in the kitchens, the cook's shouts had more air in them, less bite. Even the steward gave fewer punishments. On the morning of Festival Day, the boy woke before the bell, not to duty, but to anticipation. He dressed in his best tunic, the one without patches. Orla had even sewn a small loop of blue thread into the hem, hidden but there, a bit of sky stitched into grey. When he arrived in the hall, the long tables were already dressed. Cloth had been laid, not clean but clean enough. Candles were lit, not just for sight, but for glow. The castle felt different, lighter, not because it had changed, but because just for a day it allowed itself to be soft. The courtyard was swept. A cart had been brought in from the village, filled with pumpkins, dried apples, and wheels of cheese. There was music, real music. 2 fiddlers, a man with a small drum, and a young woman with a voice like rain. Not fancy, not grand, but bright. The boy watched from the edge, still unsure. His hands didn't know what to do without a task. Elsha passed by, her hair tied back with a red cord. She carried a tray of honey cakes, grinning as she ducked under a guard's outstretched arm. "Don't just stare," she whispered. And then she was gone. He wandered to the lower kitchens where the ovens were glowing. The cook let him taste the corner of a pie, pear and nut, spiced with cinnamon. To the armory where the weapons had been polished not for war, but display. To the chapel where candles flickered beside tiny bowls of flowers. Everywhere things shimmered, not in gold, but in kindness. Even the guards let the children climb onto the base of the tower. They didn't shout, they smiled. The boy sat there for a while, watching people below. The castle was full, servants, squires, messengers, stable hands. The Lord's son even came down, dressed in green, tossing sugared almonds into the air. No one worked that wasn't needed. No one shouted that didn't need to be heard. In the early afternoon, the feast was served. Not in the great hall, but outside, in the covered courtyard. Tables were set in a long horseshoe shape. The servants and laborers were allowed to sit. Even the boy. He sat next to the baker's helper, a red-haired girl who giggled at everything, and across from the scullery boy who always scowled but now looked confused by roast meat. There were trenchers of bread, thick stew with barley, cheese soft enough to spread, and pear cider in cups of clay. The boy ate slowly, trying to make it last, trying to memorize it. He had never tasted honey on roasted carrots before. He had never seen Elsha laugh so loud. He had never felt so still. As the sun dipped behind the wall, lanterns were lit, strung between arches and poles, paper ones, some made by hand in the weeks before, painted with patterns and pressed flowers. The courtyard glowed, and then the dancing began. Not the kind in books, just circles, steps, laughter. People clapped, spun. Even the steward's assistant tapped his foot. The boy stayed back until Elsha grabbed his hand. "Just once," she said, and pulled. He didn't know the steps. He tripped, twice. But no one laughed, because Festival Day wasn't about perfection. It was about remembering that joy existed. Even here, even now, even in stone. Later, when his feet ached and his arms were sore from clapping, he sat alone by the edge of the garden wall. The stars were out, the firelight flickered, and from somewhere in the kitchens, the faint smell of spiced cake drifted on the wind. He breathed deeply. Tomorrow would return the scrubbing, the shouting, the endless list of tasks. But tonight he belonged. And for a boy whose name no one spoke, that was everything. He slept deeply that night, still wearing the blue threaded tunic, fingers curled around a sugared nut he'd saved in his pocket. He dreamed of lanterns, and music, and the sound of laughter inside a castle that, for one day, had allowed itself to smile. Summer came slowly. It began not with sun, but with stillness, a pause in the wind, a hush in the mornings. The frost that once clung to the castle's edges melted away quietly, replaced by a warm dampness that curled up through the stones and into the bones. For the boy, it began with sweat. Not much, just a bead along the hairline, then another on the back of the neck, then a line down the spine that soaked into his only clean tunic by breakfast. The castle was not built for summer. It held cold like a memory, but heat made it ache. The thick stones trapped the warmth and then gave it back in slow, suffocating breaths. The upper halls turned dry and hot by noon. The lower cellars, once a place of cool retreat, turned sour with rot and flies. Summer was not a time of ease. It was a time of labor. The days grew long, too long. The sun rose early and lingered late, making the hours of rest shorter and the expectations higher. Everyone worked more, because crops had to be tended, and walls had to be patched. And travelers, so many travelers, came through the gates seeking shelter, water, messages, supplies. The castle bustled, but not joyfully. Tempers rose with the heat. In the kitchens, Mistress Orla grew sharp. The soup was too thick, the meat too dry, the bread too hard, the wine too warm. Elsha kept her head down. The boy learned to tread more softly. He became used to the sweat, used to the ache, used to the way his clothes clung like wet paper. But he never got used to the smell. The castle began to reek of things long buried: old meat, damp straw, spilled milk, hot iron, grease and feet. And no matter how many buckets were emptied, how much lavender was boiled, how many windows were thrown open, the smell endured. A castle in summer was a place where dignity melted. There were moments of stillness, though. Not peace, just stillness. Like the afternoon when he was sent to the old library. The air was so thick he could barely breathe. Dust hung in the shafts of light like glitter, and the stone beneath his feet was warm to the touch. He carried a stack of unused parchment and set it by the desk, careful not to smudge the ink. As he turned to leave, he saw a bee. Just one. It hovered by the window, slow and lazy, dancing against the heat. He stood there watching it. For 5 full minutes, it felt like a dream. Sometimes, at night, he would go to the roof with Elsha, just to breathe. The air up there was still hot, but it moved, just enough. They would lie on their backs against the slates and stare at the stars. "Do you think the stars feel the heat?" she once asked. He didn't answer. He liked the question better than anything he might have said. One morning, they awoke to find smoke curling from a window in the east wing. Not the usual smoke, not kitchen smoke or chimney smoke, but black smoke. Wrong smoke. The bell rang 3 times, sharp and urgent. Everyone ran. The boy, unsure of where to go, followed Elsha. She grabbed a bucket. So did he. They joined a line, passing water from the well to the east wing. It wasn't a large fire, not yet. But it was stubborn, and it came from a room that shouldn't have burned. Empty since the scribe had died that winter. No one had entered for months, and yet the fire had begun there. The flames were put out by nightfall. The room was charred, the window blackened, the tapestries gone. No one was hurt, but something felt wrong. Too many people looked too long at the ashes. Too many servants whispered behind their hands. The boy heard things. Not the first fire. Last summer too. Always the east wing. And once, something sleeps there. Summer wore on. The fire was cleaned. The ashes swept. The room sealed. But the smoke lingered. Not in the air, in the mind. The boy began to notice things, like how Mistress Orla double-locked the kitchen door at night, like how the steward never walked alone after dark, like how the priest muttered blessings near the east wall before prayers, and how the birds avoided the scorched window. One afternoon, while scrubbing flagstones in the chapel entry, he found a burned scrap of parchment. Just one line remained legible. "Keep the door sealed, lest it wake." He folded it, slipped it into his pocket. He didn't show Elsha, didn't tell anyone. But that night he returned to the secret room, the one behind the cellar wall, and there, in the silence, he lit a single candle and read the words again. "Keep the door sealed, lest it wake." He didn't know what it meant, but somehow he felt it was meant for him. Summer was not over yet. Autumn came without asking. It didn't knock or announce itself. It just slipped in, quietly, during the night, replacing the heavy breath of summer with something cooler, older. The boy noticed it first in the mornings, when the straw no longer felt damp but crisp, when his fingers, upon waking, sought warmth rather than escape. The trees beyond the castle's edge turned first. Faintly, shyly, green tinged with rust, then copper, then gold. The change was slow but certain, and with it the castle began to shift. The pace did not ease. Work still ruled the day. But the air carried a different weight now, not heat, but hush. The wind came more often, whispering through the shutters, stirring loose dust and forgotten smells. Autumn was the season of memory, and the stones remembered. The boy, now taller than before, older in ways that couldn't be measured by years, moved with quiet efficiency. He no longer flinched at orders, no longer startled at the creak of the chapel doors. But he did listen more, to the walls, to the stairs, to the cold voice of wind against stone. He had not forgotten the fire in the east wing, nor the parchment, nor the shadow behind the sealed cellar wall. Elsha noticed his silences, but she didn't ask. Not yet. One morning, while sweeping leaves from the cloister steps, he saw them. 3 riders, Unfamiliar cloaks, dust on their boots, voices too low for comfort. They spoke with the steward in the upper hall, then disappeared into the chapel tower. When they emerged, they carried nothing, but the air felt colder, and that night the boy passed them in the lower corridor. They stopped talking as he neared, watched him go. He did not look back. The days shortened. Lanterns were lit earlier, meals grew heartier, apples replaced pears, smoke replaced sweat, and always, always that feeling of something near. The east wing remained sealed, but the scorched window had been scrubbed, whitewashed, pretended. Still, some nights, when the boy crept to the roof, he saw it, a faint glow, as if a candle flickered behind empty glass. It was Elsha who brought him the second clue, a broken charm, hung with red string, found under a loose floor tile near the stables. "I think it's protection," she said, voice low, or was. The string was frayed, the charm cracked. "What does it protect from?" he asked. She looked at the eastern tower, didn't answer. That evening, he returned to the secret space behind the cellar. He brought the charm, laid it beside the parchment. The candle flickered, and in its light he noticed something new. A mark on the wall, carved faintly behind the shadow of a beam. A circle. Inside it, a shape that might have been an eye. He traced it with his finger, felt the groove. Something in him turned. Not fear, not yet. Just readiness. The next week the wind grew stronger. Doors slammed without touch. The cook's fire blew out twice. The priest fell sick, and the steward began keeping the chapel locked. "Only until the storm passes," he said. But the skies were clear. On the last day of the month, the boy found a dead bird on the library stairs. Not injured, not torn. Just still, its wings folded, its eyes open. Elsha wouldn't go near it. The steward had it burned. But that night, the boy dreamed of feathers falling through stone, and a voice that whispered, "Soon." The festival of lanterns arrived. Not the summer one. This was different, quieter, older. Each servant was given a single candle, told to place it somewhere meaningful. A gesture of protection, of remembrance. Elsha placed hers on the kitchen hearth. Mistress Orla placed hers on her mother's grave. The boy, he placed his in the cellar, behind the wall, where the parchment and charm waited, where the circle had been carved, where the air had gone cold. He lit the candle, watched the flame dance, and in that glow he whispered the question that had sat inside him since the fire. "What are you?" The shadows did not answer, but they leaned in. Autumn had settled, and with it, the quiet turning of something hidden. Beneath the stone, behind the smoke, inside the walls that remembered too much. And the boy, no longer just a servant, no longer just a watcher, became something else. A keeper, of questions, of secrets, of the thin line between duty and knowing. And though the leaves fell like fire and the nights crept deeper, he was not afraid, only awake. The castle rarely looked beyond its walls. Its life was stone and straw, soup and soot. A world of duties and repetition. What lived past the gate was someone else's worry. The villagers, the riders, the woodsmen who came and went with sacks of game and stories. But now and then the boy was chosen to leave. Only on quiet days. Only when the steward's list ran short and someone needed to fetch a bolt of cloth or a bundle of herbs from the hedgerow. This time it was mushrooms. Mistress Orla had sent him with a basket and a cloth sack, warning him about the false caps and the red-spotted ones that glowed like curses. "Look beneath," she had said, pushing the basket into his arms. "The bad ones smell like metal." He had nodded. He always did. The forest was only half a mile past the rear gate, but it might as well have been another world. The boy stepped from the gravel path onto loam and leaves. The change was immediate. The air smelled green, not fresh like water, but thick like breath. Like the trees exhaled slowly, deeply, and didn't care who heard. The canopy was high but close. It let in light the way stained glass did, softly in beams and patches. Motes of dust spun through sunlit columns. Birds spoke in quick syllables from above. He followed the path. It was narrow, winding, and clearly worn. Many someones, had walked it before, but it still felt secret, the kind of place that let you in because it was bored, not because it welcomed you. He knelt by the first cluster of mushrooms, white caps, short stems, smelled like bread crust and soil. Good. He plucked 3, careful not to disturb the ring, and laid them into the basket. He worked quietly, slowly. The forest asked for that. By midday, his basket was nearly full. He had wandered deeper than he meant to. The light had changed. So had the air. There was no breeze, no birdsong. Even the earth seemed to listen. Then a sound. Low. Whispered. Not language, not wind, just a hush that didn't belong. The boy stood, listened. Another whisper. He turned and saw it. A figure, just at the edge of sight, between 2 leaning oaks. Not cloaked, not armored, not shaped like a knight or servant. Tall, thin, still, watching. He blinked. It was gone. He backed away slowly, did not run. The forest did not like sudden movement. He turned to find the path, but the way he had come was no longer clear. Leaves looked the same. Moss ran in the wrong direction. He turned again. There, a stone, half buried, with a mark carved into its face. A circle, with an eye. His heart beat faster. He touched the stone, felt its chill. Then, a whisper. Closer now. He could not make out the words, but the tone was kind. Not soft, but familiar. He followed it. The path reappeared. Not as it was, but new. It led to a clearing. Inside it, the light shifted. Warm gold, like late summer. The air hummed. At the center, a pool, small, still. Around it, mushrooms, dozens, hundreds, more than he'd seen in all his life. And beside the pool, a figure, sitting, wearing a grey tunic, bare feet, long hair like tangled straw. They turned and smiled. He stepped back. The figure said nothing, only looked at him. Their eyes were not strange. They were the color of old wood, sad and deep. The boy raised his basket, as if to explain. "I was sent," he whispered. The figure nodded. "You can take what you need," they said. Their voice was low, not quite man, not quite woman, just knowing. He gathered mushrooms, the good kind, the right kind. The figure watched, not menacing, just present. When he finished, the figure stood, stepped to the pool, pointed to the water. "You'll see it again," they said. "See what?" "The thing behind the wall." The boy froze. "What is it?" But the figure only smiled, and stepped into the water, and vanished. The clearing dimmed, the light folded in, the mushrooms remained, but the air no longer hummed. And the path was clear. He returned to the castle by dusk, basket full, hands shaking. He gave the mushrooms to Mistress Orla. She sniffed them, nodded, said nothing more. He said nothing at all. That night he did not sleep. He lay awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. And when the wind whispered through the shutters, he did not flinch. Because he knew the sound now, and it was not the wind. The storm began without thunder, just a change in the light, a quiet turning of the sky from silver to slate. No one noticed at first. The castle carried on, servants polishing, guards pacing, fires stoked in hearths just beginning to crave them again. But by the second hour after midday, the wind rose, and with it something shifted. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The boy was in the upper hall when it happened, carrying a tray of boiled linen for the healer. The corridor suddenly darkened, the tall windows trembling as clouds passed like animals above. He paused. Not because he was afraid, but because the air felt different. It wasn't cold, but it pressed, heavy, thick, like a breath held too long. Then came the first strike of lightning, not outside, but inside. A sharp crack, not of sky, of stone. The boy dropped the tray. It clattered to the floor, a clean sound, bright and wrong. The corridor tilted, only for a moment, but enough to send dust spilling from the ceiling's edge. He heard nothing else, no screams, no bells, just that silence. And in it, a whisper, no words, just direction. Down. He ran without knowing why. past the kitchen, through the storage hall, into the servants' wing. He reached the cellar. There the air was colder, not just from the storm, from something else, the hidden room. He slipped through the familiar crack in the wall. The candle he kept hidden there still stood on its stone. He lit it, watched the flame dance. Nothing had changed. And yet, the wall opposite him looked thinner, not in size, but in silence. He stepped closer, put his hand against the stone, and felt it move. A seam opened, not wide, not sudden, just enough. He pressed, it gave. A gap appeared, just shoulder wide, just deep enough to be darkness. He hesitated, but only for a breath, then slipped through. The passage was narrow, low, uneven. He moved slowly, the candle sputtered, the walls pressed, stone on one side, damp earth on the other. He passed old wood beams, sagging, rusted lantern hooks, and symbols carved into the stone. The eye again, circles, spirals, lines. Some glowed faintly when the flame passed near. He did not touch them. The tunnel bent, then fell. Stairs, crumbled, irregular, slick. He descended. The air thickened, smelled like coins, ash, and wet fur. Then a door, wood. Ancient, bound in iron, closed but not locked. His hand shook. He pressed. It opened. Inside, a chamber, round, low-ceilinged, lined in stone. Empty, but not. He felt it before he saw it. The weight, the waiting. The walls were covered in carvings, not just eyes. Figures, servants, chained. A figure above them, shadowed, crowned, and below. A door, just like this one. He stepped forward. The carvings shimmered, not with magic, with memory. He saw moments, not with his eyes, but with something else. A servant hiding food, a steward burying parchment, a girl lighting a candle in this very room, over and over, secrets kept, warnings ignored. Then silence, then darkness. He knelt, not to pray, to listen. His breath slowed. He could hear the stone breathe. A voice, not with sound, but certainty. You are not the first, but you are the one who stayed. The candle dimmed, the room faded. He blinked, was standing again. The carvings were still, the air dry. He stepped back, closed the door. The tunnel behind him waited. He returned to the cellar. The wall closed without touch. Outside, the storm had passed, but something had changed. Not broken, not revealed, just begun. That night, Elsha found him on the roof. He told her nothing, just sat beside her. They watched the stars, and when she asked what the storm had brought, he said only, a door. And she nodded, as if she'd known, all along. It came with a silence so pure, it seemed to hush the very breath of the castle. Frost, not snow, not yet. Just a pale veil that kissed the corners of stone and blanketed the grass with a glimmering white. It arrived in the dark, painting the windows with delicate webs. And in the first light of morning, the castle awoke to a different world. Colder, sharper, still. The boy rose with a shiver. His blanket, once enough, now felt thin as a shadow. He wrapped his cloak tighter, dipped his hands into the basin, and hissed. The water bit like ice. Elsha met him in the corridor, breath misting in the air. They exchanged no words, only a glance. They both felt it. Winter was coming. The rhythm of the castle changed with the frost. Fires were stoked earlier and with greater care. Blankets appeared where once there were none, layered over beds, tucked under benches, hung at doorways to keep the cold from creeping in. The kitchens burned hotter, the air thick with spice and smoke. Orla cooked more stew, more root vegetables, less bread. She muttered constantly, "Something's not right this season." No one asked what she meant, but everyone moved more quietly. Even the stone seemed to listen. In the chapel, prayers grew longer. The priest, pale, feverish, and wrapped in furs, insisted on daily blessings. He sprinkled water across doorways, chalked sigils above arches, and muttered old words the boy had never heard before. Once he paused mid-prayer and turned sharply. "There are things beneath us," he whispered, eyes unfocused, "and above us too. but it's the ones beneath who wake in the cold. The boy held his gaze, then nodded. By the second week of frost, the castle had changed. Not broken, not frightened, just cautious. Salt appeared on thresholds, ropes were tightened, tavern songs grew softer, and the marks returned. Not everywhere, not to everyone, just to those who knew where to look. The boy found the first near the well, carved in the wood frame just beneath the bucket's resting edge. A spiral, simple, subtle, but fresh. He touched it, felt the smoothness of the cut. The second was on the door of the chapel, not drawn, burned. He said nothing, but the priest did. "This frost is not just weather," he murmured, running his hand over the symbol. "It's a warning." Elsha came to him late one night. She held a bundle of cloth. Inside, a book. Leather-bound, heavy, old. "From the steward's quarters," she said, "hidden behind the wardrobe. It was wrapped in herbs." The boy opened it. The pages smelled of earth. Inside, diagrams, symbols, notes in a language neither could name. And a drawing, a map, of the castle. But not as it was. As it had been, the drawing showed a chamber. Beneath the chapel, far below, sealed, with 3 marks around its door, one of which matched the carving by the well. The boy traced the lines. He remembered the whisper in the forest. "You'll see it again. The thing behind the wall." The next morning the frost returned heavier. Windows cracked. The garden's last cabbages wilted into ice. Mistress Orla did not speak. The steward coughed blood into his sleeve. The priest would not leave the chapel. The boy and Elsha returned to the hidden room. The candle still stood. The charm still lay broken. The wall still cold. They did not enter the tunnel. Not yet. Instead they laid the book open on the stone and read. The writings spoke of winters past, of seasons where the frost came early, of years where dreams turned sour and the birds did not return. They spoke of something ancient, not evil, but old, older than faith, older than kings. It had no name, only need. The writings called it the hollow hunger, a silence that fed, a sleep that stirred in cold, and always it began with frost. The boy looked up. Elsha's hands trembled. He reached across, held them. She did not pull away. They returned to the steward, told him part of what they knew, not all, not yet. He listened, then opened a locked drawer. Inside, a key, old iron, wrapped in cloth. "Keep it," he said, and said nothing more. The frost thickened, faith deepened, and somewhere beneath the stone, the hollow hunger stirred. Not awakened, not yet, but listening. And the boy, now more than a boy, listened back. The cold had stopped pretending to leave. It no longer drifted in and out with the wind or settled quietly in corners. It stayed now, nestled between the cracks in the flagstones, curled like a cat beneath the wooden beams of the hall, and breathing softly in the gaps of shutters left ajar. The castle was full of cold, but not the kind you could chase away with fire or extra straw. This was memory cold, stone cold, something much older than the frost. The boy felt it first in his bones, in the still ache of his wrists, in the pause of his breath when he stepped through the eastern corridor. The castle was no longer just watching. It had begun remembering. In the days after the Festival of Lanterns, strange things returned to their rhythm, but not quite the same rhythm as before. The steward resumed his sharp instructions, but his voice never rose above a whisper. The cook sang again while stirring her broth, but only songs with no words. Elsha smiled more often, but it was the kind of smile you give to a question you're not ready to answer. The boy kept to his duties. He swept, scrubbed, collected wood, and carried messages between tower and stable. But in his heart, he carried something else. The echo, the whisper from beneath the stone, the shape of the eye carved into places it did not belong. The charm Elsha had found was still beneath his mattress, wrapped carefully in a bit of linen. He didn't wear it. But sometimes, at night, he held it between his palms and waited for the warmth to come. It didn't, not yet. The eastern tower had remained sealed for weeks now. No servant entered without purpose. No door opened unless the steward himself unlocked it. But the boy noticed things. The frost clung more stubbornly near that wing. The windows clouded even from the inside. And once, just once, he heard the faint sound of footsteps above him where no one walked. The chapel remained quiet too. The priest, once ever present in his murmured prayers and soft coughs, had not been seen in days. His robes still hung neatly in the vestry, his incense still burned on the third hour, but no one answered when the bell was rung. The castle was holding its breath, and beneath it something waited. One night Elsha found the boy in the cloister, standing barefoot in the frost, staring at the sky. She said nothing at first, just stood beside him, letting the silence settle. Then she spoke. "Do you remember the mirror?" He nodded. "I've been dreaming of it," she whispered, "of the room behind the cellar." He turned to her. "I dream of it too." They both stood for a moment longer. Then, as if decided by something far older than either of them, they walked back toward the cellar, slow and quiet, their breath fogging in the moonlight. The passage behind the wall opened easily this time. The stone groaned, but not in protest. More like a sigh, long and tired. Inside, the candlelight flickered. The carvings on the walls had not changed, but the dust had been disturbed. Someone had been here. Or something. The stone box remained at the center, still closed, still waiting. But near the far corner of the chamber, where once there had been only blank wall, there now lay a new mark, faint but certain. A circle. Inside it, 3 lines, and below it, in the dust, a footprint. Small, bare. They didn't speak. Elsha stepped closer to the wall and laid her palm against the stone. Nothing moved, nothing changed. But the boy heard something, not a sound, a feeling, like something had just turned its head toward him in the dark. They left without touching the box, without brushing away the dust or pressing further into the unknown. But the next morning, something was different. The frost on the kitchen windows had formed a pattern, spirals. The firewood was damp despite having stayed dry inside. The lanterns refused to stay lit in the eastern corridor. And in the chapel, the bell rang once, only once, at a time when no one was near it. The servants murmured about weather or drafts or tricks of old towers. But the boy and Elsha knew better. The stone had begun to speak. Days passed, nights slower. The boy found it harder to rest. His dreams had lengthened, turning from flickers to full memories, but memories that were not his. He stood in halls he'd never seen, wearing clothes he'd never owned. He watched shadows shift across stone floors while voices whispered names in languages he couldn't understand, and yet somehow recognized. Once he awoke with a single word in his mouth. Not English, not Latin, something older. He tried to say it again, in waking, but the sound dissolved before it reached his lips. Only the feeling remained, a warmth at the center of his chest, like something waiting to be remembered. On the 7th day, Elsha brought him something wrapped in dark cloth. "I found it in the old sewing room," she said. He opened it gently. Inside, a fragment of mirror. The same kind as in the hidden chamber. Its edges were sharp, its surface clouded. But as he held it to the light, a shape shimmered faintly on its face. The eye. He met her gaze. "We should go back." They returned at dusk. This time the stone opened before they touched it. The room inside was brighter, not lit, but luminous, as if the very walls had begun to glow from memory. The carvings pulsed faintly. The box, still closed, hummed with presence, and across from it, on the far wall, something had changed. A second panel had shifted, revealing a doorway, low, rounded, its edges carved with soft spirals, gentle lines. Not a warning, a welcome. The boy stepped toward it. Elsha followed. Beyond the doorway, a room of mirrors. Small, each no larger than a plate. Dozens of them, hung along the curved wall in perfect silence. None showed reflections. Not at first. But as they entered, the candlelight caught one, then another, and images began to form, flickering, shifting, scenes. The courtyard long ago with a tree now gone. The chapel with rows of people kneeling, heads bowed. The eastern tower built from scaffolds of wood and rope. A child running through the halls, and then the boy. Younger or older, He couldn't tell, looking back at himself from within the mirror. He staggered back. Elsha caught his arm. "It's you," she whispered, "but not just now." The mirrors weren't for vanity. They were for remembering. Not just faces, but moments, echoes of what the castle had seen and what it had kept. He walked the length of the wall, touching nothing, only watching. The last mirror held no image, only shadow, and in that shadow, the eye. Open, still, waiting. They left the mirror room in silence. Back in the main chamber, the box sat quiet. But on the floor before it, a single word had been etched into the dust. A word neither of them had written. A word older than the language they knew. And yet it meant something clear. Soon. That night the frost began to melt. Not everywhere, but in the cloister garden, a single patch of green emerged from beneath the white, one leaf trembling. And from the tower above, a single chime rang out at midnight. Clear, low, and kind. The frost had softened its grip, but the cold remained. It lived now not in the air, but in stillness, in the quiet between footfalls, in the hush before dawn, in the long exhale of the castle's breath. The boy had come to understand that silence. Not the kind that meant absence, but the kind that meant listening. That evening, Elsha stayed behind in the cloister. She sat cross-legged beneath the high window, pages of parchment spread before her, old stained records from the chapel's library. She was tracing symbols now, circles, spirals, the same marks they had seen carved deep beneath the stone. "I'll follow soon," she had said softly. "There's something here." The boy only nodded. He didn't know why, but he felt it too. Tonight would be different. He walked alone, a single candle cupped in his hand. Down through the kitchen passage, past the shadowed stairwell, into the cellar. The hidden door behind the wall creaked open without resistance. The tunnel welcomed him, and beyond it, the chamber of mirrors. The room greeted him in silence. Dozens of mirrors, each the size of a plate, curved along the stone wall. Most were blank, dark glass. Some shimmered faintly in the candlelight, but one, third from the right on the eastern curve, seemed to flicker. The boy stepped closer, and this time it did not show his reflection. Instead, it showed the box. The stone box, resting on the pedestal in the center of the main room. But open. Inside, a mirror. Round, frameless, smooth. He turned. Behind him, the real box remained sealed, unmoved. But in the mirror's quiet flicker, the image persisted. The box. The mirror. Waiting. He stepped back, approached the pedestal, set the candle down on the cold stone, and touched the lid. It was warm, not hot, just lived in. The way a stone feels after the sun has gone down but hasn't quite forgotten the light. The lid moved without resistance. Inside lay a small round mirror, no larger than the palm of his hand. It reflected nothing, not his face, not the flame, just stillness. He leaned closer, and then he felt it. Not heard, not spoken. A thought, deep and low, blooming in his chest like smoke. You are not the first, you are not the last, you are the one who woke. He didn't move. The mirror pulsed once, softly, then dimmed, and the boy understood. The castle hadn't chosen him, it had recognized him. Something in him, or around him, had always belonged to this place. And now the stone remembered. He closed the box gently. When he turned, the mirrors remained unchanged. All except one, the furthest on the northern curve. It flickered. He stepped closer and saw her, Elsha. Back in the upper halls, the snow had stopped. The wind had softened. In the garden by the cloister, a single green shoot pushed gently through the earth. And on the old bench beside the chapel wall, someone had etched a faint circle. Inside it, a single open eye, and beneath it, a word. Return. The castle had begun to hum, not in music, not in chant, but in the way an old tree hums when the wind moves through it, slow, full of memory, and just barely heard. You had to listen carefully to feel it. And the boy had learned how, not with his ears, but with his stillness. The kind of listening done by people who know that some truths won't come when asked, only when waited for, And so, on a grey morning, with winter coiling itself more tightly around the towers, the boy woke with ash on his fingers. Not from firewood, not from the cook's hearth, but from something he didn't remember touching. A shimmer of black at his fingertips, as though he'd been holding something that was not quite fire, but not quite not. And as he stood, he smelled it too, a scent that should not have been there. Smoke, salt, stone warmed by something more ancient than the sun. That evening, Elsha found him beneath the bell tower, the last sliver of sunlight curved around her hair like a veil of copper thread. She held 2 candles, one whole, one broken at the base. Her voice, when it came, was soft enough to be mistaken for the wind. "It's burning again," she said. The boy blinked. "What is?" "The flame. The one in the mirror chamber. Or beneath it." She paused. "I saw it in my dream, but it wasn't just a dream. I could feel the heat. It was alive. It whispered." She placed the broken candle in his palm. "This belonged to the woman in the red window. The mural. Remember?" The boy did remember. The spiral painted into her necklace. The same shape carved into the wall of the hidden room. Symbols that had started as decoration and become something else, something more alive. "Why now?" he asked. Elsha shook her head, but her silence wasn't a lack of knowing. It was something older than answers. That night they returned to the cellar. The passage opened for them like breath. And as they stepped into the mirror chamber, they stopped. Because every mirror was glowing, not brightly, not like torchlight or flame, but softly, like fireflies trapped behind glass. Each one shimmered, each one pulsed, as though the stone had begun to breathe again. At the center of the chamber, the box that once held the blank mirror now held something new. A flame, but not a flame. It flickered, it moved, it danced, but it did not consume. It had no wick, no source, just presence. And the moment their candlelight touched it, it flared, gold and silver and something almost blue at the edges. And then one of the mirrors behind them spoke. Not with a voice, not with a word, just a whisper that moved across the room like breath under a closed door. "What did it say?" the boy asked. Elsha was already walking toward the sound. "Not what," she whispered. "Who?" She touched the mirror with her fingers, and inside it a new scene appeared. The Eastern Tower. The very top, a room long locked, shuttered, silent, but now open, and within it a woman, standing still, her eyes wide, her sleeves lined with red thread. Around her neck, the charm Elsha had found. The boy shivered. "That's her." "She's been waiting," Elsha said. The flame pulsed again, once, twice, then slowly tilted toward the northern wall, as if it were pointing, not with urgency, but with knowing, and there, set low in the stone, was a mirror unlike the others. Oval, tarnished. It hadn't glowed before, but now it shivered. Elsha reached it first. As her fingers brushed the edge, the wall beside it sighed, and opened. Not like stone breaking, more like something remembering how to move. A doorway formed, and behind it, stairs. Downward. They did not hesitate. Down they went. One step at a time, no torch, no sound, only the soft flicker of the whispering flame which Elsha now carried in a shallow dish like an offering. The stair turned once, then again, then a third time, too many turns for the depth. And finally they reached it, a second chamber, round, smooth. But this time there were no mirrors, only walls etched with thousands of tiny spirals. And at the center, a basin, carved from one single stone. Inside it, water, clear, still, lit only by the shimmer of the flame Elsha held, and beside it, a bench, a place to sit, a place to watch. They did not speak. The boy stepped forward and gazed into the basin. At first it showed nothing, then, slowly, his face. But not as it was, as it had been, as it might be, a child, a man, a shadow moving through halls he didn't yet know. And behind him, always, the castle, changing, breathing, waiting. He blinked, the vision was gone, only water, only silence, but his chest felt full, not with fear, with memory. Elsha set the flame beside the basin, then she knelt and dipped her fingers into the water. Not deep, just enough to stir a ripple, and in that ripple something moved. Not in the basin, in the air, a breath, a wordless voice, a warmth behind the stone, and the flame bent toward her, whispering, welcoming. She turned to the boy. "I think this is the well." He frowned. "What well?" "The one they forgot. The one the mirrors were made to protect." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the broken candle, held it over the basin, let a single drop of wax fall into the water. It floated, then disappeared. The flame flared, and every spiral on the wall glowed. For just a moment, softly, as if the stone had sighed. This was not a place of answers, it was a place of keeping, a room built not to explain, but to remember, to carry something that could not be written, only felt, only passed from hand to hand, whisper to whisper, breath to breath, and now it was theirs to carry. They sat for a long while, saying nothing, letting the flame burn, letting the water ripple, until at last the boy rose and touched the stone beside the basin. "It's not done," he said softly. "No," Elsha replied, "it's only just beginning." And as they turned to leave, the spiral nearest the door glowed again, and beneath it a word appeared, carved fresh into the stone, though no hand had touched it. "Bring her." Outside the snow had returned, but gently, soft as breath, the castle walls no longer a prison. Now, a heart, now a memory, now a keeper of flame. And the two who had listened and waited and walked beneath the stone had become its voice. Winter did not arrive like thunder. It didn't shout or strike or demand. It crept, softly, patiently, like snow falling on an old roof, quiet, steady and sure. The castle noticed before anyone else. Stone absorbed the cold first. Then the wind started moving differently, not sharp, but deep. Like it wasn't trying to push things away, but remind them of something older, something that had been waiting. And then the sounds changed. Footsteps seemed smaller, voices softened. The clatter of buckets, trays, boots on stone, all of it dulled, as if the castle were laying a gentle finger across its own lips. Shh. The boy felt it before he saw it. He'd grown used to the moods of the castle now, the way it breathed, the way it blinked, and now it was breathing slowly, as though it was watching something very far away, or listening. Elsha changed with the weather. She still helped in the kitchen, still swept the hallways, still whispered with the boy beneath the chapel stairs. But she'd grown quieter, not heavy, not sad, just listening in the same way the castle was. In the evenings, she sat by the hearth with the broken candle cupped in her hands. The spiral carved into its wax still glinted like a secret. She never lit it. She just held it, like it was waiting for the right moment to speak. One night, she looked up from the fire and asked him softly, "Do you think she's still waiting?" He knew who she meant. The woman in the mural, the one in the mirror, the one who watched but never moved. "I don't think she's waiting," the boy replied. "I think she's listening." Elsha looked back at the candle. "I think it's time." They returned to the eastern tower the next morning. The sky was pale and full of waiting snow. The stairs spiraled tightly, as if they didn't trust the weight of memory climbing them. Each turn felt heavier than the last. By the time they reached the corridor at the top, the boy's breath was visible in the air. Shuttered windows lined the walls, their glass kissed with frost. And at the end of the passage, the door. It looked the same, thick, wooden, swollen with years of rain and silence. But this time, when the boy touched it, it gave way. Not with a creak, just a sigh, like something long asleep, waking with a stretch. The room was silent. Cold dust floated in sunbeams like drifting ash. But the mural was still there, and she was still there. The woman, painted in faded reds and deep ochres, stared down at them with calm eyes. Her hand rested on the wall beside her, and beneath that hand, the faint spiral. Elsha lit the candle. Its small flame wavered in the stillness, then stood tall, and as the light touched the mural, the colors deepened. Just a little. Enough to feel it. Behind the hearth, the boy heard it. A soft sound like something loosening. A crack appeared in the stone, thin, vertical. A seam that hadn't been there before, or had always been there, hidden. Not a door, not yet. But the idea of one. They didn't open it. Not that day, they just watched it, and left the candle burning behind. The next morning, things shifted. The steward said he heard singing in the chapel, low and slow, like monks at dusk. But no one was there. The cook said her dreams were full of flame, not fire, but light. And in the west tower, the great bell rang once. Not loud, not urgent, just one deep chime, enough to make the birds in the courtyard fly, enough to make the boy pause with a water bucket in his hands, enough to make Elsha whisper, "She heard us." Snow fell that night, not a storm, just steady, like a quilt being pulled over the world. The castle grew quieter still, but not heavy, just waiting, a kind of sacred hush. The boy visited the mirror chamber and stood with the box of the whispering flame. It was smaller now. The flame didn't dance as it once had, but it breathed. And as he watched, it tilted again. This time toward a mirror he hadn't looked into before. The days had shortened to whispers. Mornings came late, with a pale sun that barely cleared the trees. Evenings arrived early, draping the castle in soft blue shadows before supper was finished. Snow blanketed the outer courtyard now, thick and undisturbed. No carts came, no travellers, only the silent hush of winter curling into every hallway and stone. And beneath it all, the castle waited. It no longer felt like waiting for something to come. Now it felt like waiting for something to be remembered. The boy dreamed of the tower, of the candle that never flickered, of the spiral glowing beneath warm hands, of stone shifting without sound, and always the voice. Not a voice made of words, but breath, wind, fire wrapped in silence. He'd wake with his chest full, not frightened, but full, like his ribs were carrying something ancient and soft, like memory, like story, like a name almost remembered. That morning they climbed together. The eastern tower groaned gently beneath their feet, not in resistance, but as if it were stretching after a long sleep. They brought only what had always mattered: the charm, the broken candle, a small bundle of dried rosemary, Elsha's idea. For warmth, she said, and remembrance. Neither of them asked who they were remembering. They both knew. The door to the tower room opened without sound now. The mural had changed again. Her eyes, the woman's eyes, no longer stared outward. They looked downward, toward the spiral, toward the hidden line in the wall, and when Elsha lit the candle and set it beneath the painting, the crack widened. Dust fell. A breeze moved through the room, but it did not come from the windows. It came from behind the stone. And with a soft, reluctant shudder, the wall opened, just enough for them to slip through. The air inside was warmer than expected. Not warm, but not the cold stillness of sealed rooms. It smelled faintly of sage, of paper, of something burned long ago. It wasn't a large space, smaller than the chapel's sacristy, larger than a cell. But everything inside it had been placed with care. A wooden chair, a narrow writing table, a set of shelves bowed slightly in the middle. And across every surface, marks, not mess, not dust, symbols, spirals, carvings that looked like they had not been made with tools, but with fingertips pressed gently into stone. There were candles still in the corners, melted low, unlit, and in the center of the table, a book, closed, bound in leather worn thin by time. The boy stepped forward first. He touched nothing, only stood still, letting the room notice him. Elsha knelt near the wall, her fingers brushing the spirals. "They're not decoration," she whispered. "They're memory." The boy nodded, then opened the book. It was written in two hands, one neat, flowing, almost a drawing more than writing, the other tighter, hesitant, like someone copying something older. The pages were full of maps, not of land, of rooms, spirals, motions, and between them lines of thought, dreams, fragments of something spoken long ago, a name written in breath. The mirror is not a thing, but a way. The castle listens, it always has, not to sound but to truth. The boy felt his heartbeat slow. Elsha leaned closer. "Some of these are songs," she said. He looked at the symbols, then again. And yes, she was right. Not in melody, but in pattern. Rises, falls, repetitions. Like lullabies carved into stone. Then between the pages, a single folded paper. Stiff, yellowed, he opened it. One sentence, "She didn't die, she stayed." And beneath it, a drawing, a spiral, but this time at its center, a door. They stayed in the room until the candle burned low. No one came looking for them. The castle knew where they were, and when they stepped back into the tower room, the mural had changed again. The woman now faced the wall, her hands open, as if she had just led them through. That night, the boy could not sleep. He lay beneath his thin blanket, the wind whispering against the shutters, and felt the room he'd seen pressed behind his eyes. The candle, the book, the spiral on the page. He rose silently, pulled on his cloak, and walked through the hall barefoot. Past the kitchens, past the cloister, back to the spiral room beneath the castle, and there he lit the whispering flame once more. It did not flare, it did not guide, it simply stayed, waiting, listening, and for the first time he whispered back, "I see you now." The next days passed like a dream. The castle didn't change, but it felt lighter, as if it had set down something it had been carrying for years. The cook hummed without knowing why. The steward smiled without remembering how. Even the old priest spoke of dreams, of towers, of spirals, of a woman watching over a library he didn't remember existing. The boy and Elsha returned to the hidden room again and again. Each time it greeted them, sometimes with new pages in the book, sometimes with echoes. Once with a soft glow from the stone behind the shelves, and slowly they began to understand. It wasn't just her room. It was a memory of her, pressed into walls, carved into breath, folded like paper into the very shape of the stone. She hadn't vanished. She'd become the room, the whisper, the spiral. They found her name near the final page. It wasn't written with pride, just offered. Merelda, no title, no crown, no legend. Just a name, folded gently into the page like a petal. And once they read it, they both whispered it aloud. Once, together. Merelda. The next time they visited the mural, it had changed again. There was no more woman, no more charm, just the spiral, and beside it, two figures, small and quiet, with candles in their hands. One held a charm, the other a flame, both of them walking inward, toward the spiral, toward something neither of them yet understood, but were no longer afraid of. The castle no longer whispered. It sang, softly, in windows that opened themselves, in bells that rang only once, in the warmth that lingered on the stone steps even after the sun had gone. It sang of remembrance, of children who listened, of stories that lived not in pages, but in stone and fire and breath. And the boy, who had once been nameless, forgotten, was forgotten no longer. He was a keeper now, of flame, of memory, of Merelda's name. Winter reached its middle quietly. No storm announced it. No deep freeze shouted its name. It just arrived. The snow had settled into every corner of the outer grounds, laying thick on parapets and creeping into cracks between stones. The air no longer bit. It rested. Even the wind had grown gentler, like it was tired of rattling shutters and had chosen instead to hum lullabies to the sleeping earth. Inside the castle, the days passed like slow pages, and the boy, now known quietly among the servants as someone who could feel things before they happened, moved through the halls with new eyes. He no longer avoided the spiral marks. He touched them, listened, and when he did, sometimes the candles would sway, even when there was no draught. Elsha had begun to spend her mornings in the East Tower, reading from the book they'd found in the hidden room. She didn't understand all of it. Neither of them did, but they didn't have to. It wasn't written to be understood like a lesson. It was written to be felt. Some entries read like poems, some like dreams. Others were just single words, scrawled in looping script. Fold, breathe, return, unwind. They read them aloud in turns, as if speaking them helped settle the dust in the air. Sometimes it did. One evening, as frost crept along the edges of the kitchen windows, the cook made an announcement. "The Feast of Silence is tomorrow." The boy looked up. "I've never heard of that." The cook smiled. "Few have. It's old. Most don't bother with it anymore. But I remember it from my grandmother." She stirred her pot slowly, letting the words rise with the steam. "It's not a feast of food," she said. "It's a feast of listening." Elsha leaned in, curious. "We eat simple things. Bread, broth, herbs. But no one speaks. Not a word. From sunset to sunrise, silence keeps us company. It's said the castle listens most clearly then, and if it chooses to answer, it does." The boy and Elsha prepared for the feast in quiet excitement. They cleaned the East Tower room gently, placing fresh rosemary near the hearth and a new taper candle beside the book. They swept the floor of the hidden room. They whispered Merelda's name once more. And as the sun dipped behind the forested hills, the castle fell into hush. At supper, only a few candles burned. The long table in the great hall was lined with bowls of broth and rough-cut bread. The servants filed in slowly. No one spoke. Even the youngest stable boy, usually fidgeting and whispering jokes, sat still. The air was thick with the weight of stillness, not heavy but full, as if everyone in the castle had stepped into a single shared breath. The boy sat beside Elsha near the lower end of the table. He dipped his bread into the broth and ate slowly, letting each taste unfold without distraction. His thoughts drifted, not wildly but gently, to the spiral, to Merelda, to the way the mural had changed. He remembered the single word carved beside the handprint in the hidden room. Soon. He wondered what soon meant in a place where time folded. And then he felt it. A pressure, soft, not on his shoulders or his chest, in the air, like a warm palm resting gently on the moment itself. Elsha felt it too. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't speak. Instead, they both turned, not toward each other, but toward the chapel doors, which had opened slightly, by themselves. No wind, no hands, just the slow, deliberate parting of two old wooden doors. No one rose, no one moved. They all just watched and listened. A breeze rolled through the hall, carrying with it the scent of sage and smoke and something older, something not of now. Then softly, like a memory unspooling, the bell in the East Tower rang once. Not struck, just swayed, one long low note. Then silence again. But it was not empty. It was full, alive. The feast of silence passed, but its echo lingered. Even after the sun had risen and the voices returned, the castle moved more softly. Servants spoke in whispers. Footsteps slowed. The clatter of dishes, the thud of boots, all seemed gentler, as if no one wanted to disturb whatever had passed through the halls the night before. The boy felt it too. The kind of quiet that stays inside your chest, even when the world grows loud again. The kind of quiet that makes you listen, not just with ears, but with your whole self. It wasn't emptiness. It was fullness, folded into silence. A memory still warm. In the days that followed, the castle's breath felt deeper. The mirrors in the old hall stopped fogging with winter's chill, though no one could explain why. A crack in the eastern wall, long thought to be growing, seemed smaller now, and the whispering flame in the spiral chamber had grown brighter, just slightly. Elsha noticed first. She came running to find the boy, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "It's changed again," she said, breath puffing in the frosted air. "The mirror. No, the mural." They climbed the tower together. The eastern stairs were steep and cold, but they didn't mind. By now the stone knew their steps. It no longer groaned when they climbed. It welcomed. When they reached the room, the candle was already burning. Neither of them had lit it. They paused at the threshold, breath held, hearts beating slowly. The mural had indeed changed. The spiral was larger now, its edges curling farther into the stone wall. And near its center, not quite at the heart but close, there was a new figure. A third, small, neither Merelda nor the boy. Not Elsha either. A child, unfamiliar and yet known. Its hands rested on the spiral's lines as though tracing them with care. "What does it mean?" Elsha whispered. The boy stepped closer. "She's not just remembering," he said, "she's teaching." That afternoon, the snow began to fall again, heavier this time, not the soft hush of before. This was deeper, thicker. By nightfall, the windows were white with drifts. The kitchens grew busier, broth simmering, herbs bundled and dried, boots gathered near the fire to thaw. Everyone was inside now, and with the walls full of warmth and winter breath, the boy returned to the hidden room. Alone, the candle there had burned to a pool, its wax spilled gently onto the stone. But the book was open, though he hadn't left it that way, and a new page had appeared. No writing, just drawings, figures curled around one another, spirals within spirals, eyes closed. At the very center, a hearth, not like the kitchen hearth. This one glowed not with flame, but with light drawn like water, flowing outward in rings. And in the margin, a single symbol, Hui. He didn't recognize it. It wasn't like the old letters, not from the chapel, not from Merelda's writings. It felt older. He traced it with his finger. The wax beside the book shifted, just a ripple, like breath, and something in the room changed. The air warmed. Not like fire, not like heat, like breath after a long sleep. He closed his eyes, let the stillness settle around him. And in that hush, he remembered something he hadn't thought of in years. The day he arrived at the castle. How cold the cart had been. How silent the men were who sold him for 6 coins. How the sky had looked, not angry, not weeping, but watching. He'd never cried. Not then. But now, sitting in that hidden room, his palms pressed to the stone, he let a tear fall, not out of sorrow, but because something inside him had unfolded, and it needed to leave gently. When he told Elsha the next morning, she didn't ask questions. She just held out her hand. He took it, and together they went to the spiral chamber beneath the chapel. There they knelt, not to pray, not to ask, just to listen. The flame inside the box flickered gently, then bent, not toward either of them, but upward. As if pointing, they followed its invisible thread with their eyes, and saw it. Above the flame, a patch of stone they'd never noticed before, smooth, unmarked, except for a circle, faint but definite. Within it, a single indentation, candle-shaped. They exchanged a glance, and without a word, Elsha reached into her pocket and pulled out the broken spiral candle. The one they had found all those weeks ago, tucked in the wall. She placed it in the mark. It fit, perfectly. Nothing happened at first, just silence. But then, a sound. Software behind the wall, like coals shifting in an old fire. A breath of warm air brushed their faces. The spiral on the candle glowed faintly. Then from the flame's base, smoke rose, not upward, but outward, coiling in a spiral, twisting, turning, until it pressed itself gently onto the wall opposite them. And where it touched, a mark remained, a spiral drawn in ash. And in its center, the symbol again, Hui. "Do you think it means fire?" Elsha asked. The boy shook his head. Number not just fire. He reached out, touched the ash spiral. It means what's left after fire. That night, the bell in the chapel tower rang once more. Just once. Then silence. But it was a full silence, like the hush after a story is told. The kind that wraps around the listener and says, "You're part of this now." And the boy, who had once been sold for 6 coins, who had carried buckets and scrubbed soot from stone, now understood. He was not just living in the castle, he was part of its remembering. A flicker in its flame, a step in its spiral, an ember, still warm. The castle had always held secrets, but now it felt like it was beginning to share them, not all at once, not loudly, but slowly, patiently, as if it had been waiting for someone who would listen without rushing, someone who would notice the soft breath between the louder moments. The boy was that someone now. And Elsha too. They moved through the castle like threads through cloth, stitching together forgotten corners with quiet wonder. It began with a door, not a new door. In fact, it had always been there, between the old stairwell and the corridor that led to the laundry. A narrow plain door with iron hinges and a heavy handle. No one paid it any mind, until the ash spiral appeared on it. One morning, as the boy passed it with a bundle of firewood, he stopped. There it was, the spiral, the same shape they had seen in the hidden chamber, the same one that had appeared in ash the night before. Only this time it wasn't smoke. It was etched, shallow but real, pressed into the wood like a gentle fingerprint. He dropped the wood, reached out. The handle was warm. He waited for Elsha. When she arrived, she brought a candle, not the spiral one, but one they had dipped themselves just days earlier in the kitchen wax pot. She'd marked its side with a circle. Together they opened the door. It didn't creak, didn't resist. It just swung inward, revealing a narrow stone stairway, curling gently downward, not like the cold, rigid stairs of the tower, but a softer spiral, like the path of water flowing into a well. And on each step, a single lantern. Unlit, the boy touched the first one. It wasn't dusty. It had been waiting. He took Elsha's candle, touched its flame to the wick inside the lantern. It caught. With a quiet hush, the lantern glowed, not orange like fire, but soft gold. Warm, alive. They lit the next one. And the next. Each time the air grew softer. The silence deepened. Not heavy, just full, like a hand being held in the dark. At the bottom of the spiral stair was a round chamber. Small, simple. Its walls curved like a hollow in the earth, and along the entire wall, lanterns. Some old, their glass cracked or fogged with age. Some newer, but all of them waiting. Dozens, hundreds maybe. And above them, symbols, not letters, not drawings, marks. A language of light. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, unadorned, except for the spiral carved on top. They placed their candle there. It flickered once, and then every lantern in the room began to glow, not in fire, but in remembrance. Each one flickered with a different rhythm, like breath or heartbeats. A room full of resting thoughts, each lantern, a memory, a person perhaps, a keeper, a listener, a child once, just like them. Elsha walked the room slowly, her fingertips grazing the warm glass of each light. "I think these are hers," she whispered, "Merelda's. Or maybe everyone's she taught." The boy didn't answer. He was staring at one lantern near the base of the wall. It was smaller than the others, hung low, its glass fogged from the inside. He bent close, wiped the surface gently with his sleeve. And behind the fog, a symbol, not a spiral, not ash. A flame, open, unbound, and next to it carved faintly into the stone, "To remain is to remember is to keep." That night, the boy dreamed of lanterns, not in rooms, but in the sky, hung like stars above the castle towers, swaying in the windless dark. Each one pulsed gently, and with each pulse he heard a voice, not speaking, just being. Some sounded like laughter, some like lullabies, some like silence itself, wrapped in warmth. He woke with tears on his cheeks, but not from sorrow, from closeness. In the days that followed, they returned to the lantern room each evening. Sometimes they lit a new lantern, sometimes they just sat, and sometimes, rarely, a new lantern would glow on its own. Without touch, just the warmth of memory waking again. The castle was no longer just a place of stone and work. It was a story, still being told. And the boy, who had once been given away, sold into silence, was now the keeper of hundreds of lights, and one by one they were remembering how to shine. It was the sound that woke him, not loud, not sharp, just there. A low hum, not unlike the wind, but not of the wind. It came from beneath the floor, from beneath the stone. He sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from his shoulders. The fire in the hearth had died down to glowing coals, and the windows were dark with frost. But the hum continued, a soft, steady rhythm, as if the earth itself were whispering through the walls. By the time the boy reached the spiral chamber, the hum had faded, but the whispering flame was dancing wildly, pulling sideways toward the far end of the chamber, near the corner where water sometimes leaked in spring. He'd never looked closely there, few had, but now it called to him. Elsha met him minutes later. Wrapped in 2 cloaks, her hair half braided, she didn't ask why he'd summoned her. She just followed his gaze. Together they crouched by the edge of the chamber where moss gathered in damp seasons. The stone was uneven here, but in the dancing glow they saw something new. Another spiral, only half visible, half buried beneath years of grime and ivy root. And beside it, barely legible beneath the dust, not all doors open outward. They dug with their hands, not frantic, just steady. The stone gave way easily, as though it wanted to be moved. Beneath the top layer, a smoother slab, round, carved with shallow grooves, a hatch of sorts, and in its center a single hollow, candle-shaped. They both paused. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The boy reached into his satchel. He'd kept the first spiral candle, the broken one. Gently, he set it into the hollow. The grooves in the stone began to glow, first faint, then brighter, until the entire slab pulsed softly with warmth, and with the smallest sigh of dust and air, it turned, revealing a narrow passage below. The air that rose from the space was unlike the rest of the castle. It didn't carry dust or decay. It smelled of old parchment, beeswax, cedarwood, and something else. Something living. They descended together, not hurried and not afraid. The tunnel was short. At the end of it, a round chamber, smaller than the lantern room, smaller even than the hidden writing room. This space held only one thing, a stone seat, and on the seat, a small wooden box, the same spiral carved into its lid, the same strange symbol beside it, Hui, ash. The boy stepped forward, placed both hands on the lid, closed his eyes, breathed in, and lifted it. Inside, ashes, software pale, undisturbed, and resting gently among them, a ring, delicate, iron, inlaid with a spiral no bigger than a fingernail. He touched it. It was warm, as if it had just been left there, as if it remembered the hand it once belonged to. Elsa stepped closer, her voice no more than a breath. "Is it hers?" The boy nodded. He didn't need proof. He felt it. Merelda, the one who had listened before him, who had carved memory into stone, who had chosen not to leave, but to stay, in light and fire and silence. She had become the voice beneath the stone, the one they had heard in wind and flicker and dream. Not a ghost, not a spell, a remembrance made whole. They took nothing from the room. Not the ring, not the ashes, only the knowing. The weightless kind of knowing that doesn't fill your pockets, but fills your breath. They stood in silence for a long while, listening. Not for a voice, but for the presence of one. And in that stillness they felt her, not beside them. Within, by the time they emerged, morning had broken. Soft light spilled into the spiral chamber from the high window above the flame. And the ash spiral on the wall had changed again. A final mark, a handprint, small, open, facing outward. Elsa pressed her hand to it. Then the boy. The stone beneath their palms was warm, like the last embers of a fire long tended. The castle was quieter that day, not hushed, content. Like an old book after its final page is read, still full, still alive, but resting now. The cook hummed while slicing winter pears. The steward spent an hour in the library he never visited, just looking at maps, and the old priest lit a candle in the chapel without knowing why. Only that he felt he should. That evening, the boy and Elsa returned to the lantern room. They brought no new flame. They didn't need one. When they entered, one lantern, near the top, lit by itself. Soft gold, steady, and then slowly another, and another, until the whole room glowed like a memory wrapped in warmth. Dozens, hundreds, all breathing together, not fire, not heat, remembrance. They sat in the center, back to back, eyes closed, not thinking, not dreaming, just being. And the castle, ancient and patient and full of time, held them close, as it always had. Merelda's voice came not in words, but in warmth, not in sound, but in presence, and in that chamber of lanterns, of stories, of light. The boy and the girl who listened became keepers, of stone, of silence, of flame, and one chapter before the end. They understood what it meant to stay. The lanterns no longer waited to be lit. They flickered to life in their own time now, softly, without urgency. Some in the early morning, before the kitchen fires stirred. Some in the hush before evening meals. Some only when no one was watching. Each light its own rhythm, each glow a name not spoken aloud, but remembered. The castle had changed, not outwardly. The stones still stood. The towers still leaned toward the sky. The frost still gathered in the windows come morning. But within, the boy, now older than when he arrived, but not yet grown, could feel it. The walls no longer pressed in. They breathed. The corridors no longer whispered only in winter. They sang sometimes in silence. And the spiral, once a mystery traced in ash, now lived in every corner, not as a mark, but as a memory. Alive, turning, spring was near. You could taste it in the air. The snow, once thick and unmoving, had thinned, melted, dripped into the cracks, like time returning to the earth. And with the thaw came new duties. The castle's garden needed tending. The outer wall had cracked beneath the last freeze and would need stonework. But for now, the boy had chosen to sit beneath the old fig tree just beyond the east wall. It hadn't bloomed in years, but this morning a single white blossom had opened. He watched it quietly, breath slow. Elsha joined him a while later, tucking her cloak around her knees. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. "I dreamed of the ring," she said finally. "The one in the box." She nodded. "It was on your hand, but it was glowing. Not with fire, with memory." The boy smiled. "It's hers," he said, "but maybe it's meant to be passed." "To whom?" He looked at the blossom. "To whoever listens next." That evening they returned to the spiral chamber. The stone beneath their feet no longer felt cold, just quiet, at peace. The mural had changed one final time. The spiral was complete now. Not an end, not a wall, but a circle, unbroken. And within it, 3 figures. The boy, Elsha, and a third, smaller, newer, a child not yet born, or perhaps not yet arrived. The mural didn't say when, only that they would come. And when they did, the spiral would be waiting. Down in the lantern room, only one light remained unlit. The lowest one, small, clear, new. The boy reached up, candle in hand. He paused, then passed it to Elsha. "You should," he said. She smiled just barely, lit the wick, and the lantern glowed, warm, slow, and steady. Like breath, like story, like something beginning. That night, as the wind turned warmer and the walls exhaled the last breath of winter, the boy returned to the first room he'd ever slept in. It was smaller than he remembered, the cot thinner, the corners darker. But he lay down and closed his eyes, hands folded across his chest, like he used to when he was new here. Afraid, alone, only now, he was neither. The castle was no longer above him, around him, holding him in stone. It was within him. He was not just a servant, he was part of its memory. And one day, when someone else arrived, frightened, unsure, carrying a silence of their own, he would be the one waiting. A hand in the dark, a warm flame, a voice beneath the stone. In the final days of spring, the steward found a page tucked beneath his chair in the great hall. He didn't know where it came from. He couldn't read all the symbols, but he kept it, pressed it into a book with no title, and every so often he'd run a finger over the edge and wonder who had left it, and what had they wanted him to remember. In the tower, the old mural faded, not completely, but gently, as if the wall, like skin, was growing new layers, keeping the memory within rather than outside. And below it, a small spiral was carved into the floor, near the window, deep enough to last. Small enough to be missed by anyone not paying attention, but for those who noticed, it was enough. The last thing the boy did before spring came full was place a ring, the one from the ashes, in the box beneath the chapel steps. He didn't close the box fully. He left it just slightly open. An invitation, not a secret, not anymore. The story never truly ended. Not for the boy. Not for Elsha. Not for the castle that remembered. Because stories like this, stories beneath the stone, behind the smoke, within the silence, do not end. They simply Continue. In quieter ways, in slower moments, in the hush between footsteps, in the warmth of a hand holding yours in a cold hall, in the flicker of a lantern that lights on its own. So if one night you find yourself in a dream of stone walls and winding halls, if you smell cedarwood and hear footsteps with no source, if you feel a warmth that wasn't there before, it's just the castle remembering you too. Because you listened, because you stayed, because you are now part of the spiral. And the light remains, always.